I was never afraid of the forest. I grew up among icy trails, branches cracking beneath boots, the smell of pine and wet earth. Here in Eureka, Montana, silence is part of life. The kind of place where neighbors are miles away and the nights are so dark they swallow the stars. It's the kind of peace you only find where everything seems forgotten by time. My name is Samuel Whitaker, 60 years old, former forest ranger. I retired after an accident, a stupid fall during a patrol at Glacier Park. I broke my spine in 2 places and they handed me the retirement papers like some kind of consolation prize. I bought this old cabin about 3 miles north of Eureka on the edge of the Kootenai Forest, and since then it's just been me and my 3 dogs. Rex is an 8-year-old German Shepherd. Smart, protective, the kind that can sniff out lies. Murphy is a Rottweiler with a soft heart, but teeth like blades, and Benny. Benny's the little one. Part beagle, part who knows what. He chases every sound but never loses his instincts. They are my family. Everything was normal. Winter had arrived early that year. Snow covered the rooftops like a dirty blanket, and the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the smell of cold, and something else, something metallic, almost like old blood. But at first, I thought it was just a lonely old man's paranoia. On Monday, I heard the first noises. It was around 2 in the morning. Rex started to growl low in the corner of the room. Murphy stood up, ears alert. Benny ran to the door, sniffing with his tail between his legs. That wasn't normal. They're forest-trained dogs. They don't bark at squirrels. I looked through the window, but all I saw was darkness moving between the pines. No footprints, no shadows. The next morning, I went out to get firewood and saw footprints in the snow. They weren't from a moose or a bear. 4 long toes, but the size. The size wasn't natural, as if a man had beast feet. Deep, symmetrical marks, with dragged claws at the end. Probably a wolf, I thought. But something bothered me. The broken branches in the trees were nearly 6 feet high. That didn't make sense. On Wednesday, it happened again. The dogs were on alert once more, and at exactly midnight, I heard footsteps. Heavy, slow, as if someone or something was circling the house, dragging its feet. I sat in the living room, shotgun on my lap, lights off. The sound approached the porch, then vanished. Murphy whimpered softly. Rex never took his eyes off the door. Benny was curled up under the table, and I started to feel afraid. On Thursday, I went to the town's gas station. I asked Geraldine Lowe, the lady who's run the place for decades, if anyone had seen wolves roaming the area. She gave me a strange look. That's no ordinary animal, Sam. It's a full moon, and the forest holds things that don't want to be seen. I'd advise you to pray and keep your dogs close. I went back home with a bitter taste in my mouth. The howls began that night. Long, deep. They didn't sound like wolves. There was something else. A lament. A restrained rage. Each night, the dogs grew more agitated. Benny, the little one, stopped going out to play. Rex patrolled the porch like a soldier. Murphy dug holes near the fence as if expecting something to appear on the other side. On Saturday, I saw something at the edge of the forest. It was a silhouette. Tall, hunched. The skin, or fur, I don't know. It looked too dark to reflect moonlight. It stood still, watching, and for a second, I swear, I saw glowing red eyes. I fired. The thing ran, and the 3 dogs shot through the snow like arrows. The next morning, I found footprints, blood, and something else, a tooth, big, stuck in the bark of a tree. And then I knew. Whatever was out there wasn't just an animal. It was something that shouldn't exist. The tooth still had dried blood on it, a dark shade almost like rust, far too large to be from a wolf, too wide for any dog. It had the full root, which meant it had been torn out violently. The bark of the tree where I found it was splintered, as if something had struck it with its head, or been thrown against it. I took it inside, washed it, and left it on the counter. It had the texture of old ivory, but the shape wasn't canine. It was almost human, but it wasn't. The dogs spent the whole day on alert, sniffing every corner of the house, taking turns like guards on duty. Rex wouldn't eat. Benny trembled from time to time, and Murphy growled softly even in his sleep, like he was still facing that thing in his dreams. On Sunday night, I decided to reinforce security. I boarded up all the doors with crossed planks, hammered nails into the windows, and kept the shotgun at my side, loaded with heavy-duty hunting rounds. Moonlight trickled faintly through the gaps in the walls. It wasn't full yet, but almost. It felt like waiting for an earthquake. I knew it was coming, just didn't know when or from which direction. At midnight, the dogs all stood up at once, no barking. They just stared at the door. And then, footsteps. Again. But this time, they weren't just circling. They were coming. Approaching the porch, the sound of wood creaking under weight. A smell invaded the house. Strong, metallic, like rotting meat and wet fur. Murphy was the first to growl. Benny ran to me, wedging himself under the armchair. Rex growled, the hair on his back standing up. And then, a shadow. Passing across the window gap. Fast. Huge. I approached carefully, shotgun in hand. And I saw a part of the creature. A shoulder, maybe. But what struck me was the hand. Not a paw. A hand. With fingers that were too long, curved claws, and dark skin that seemed torn in places. As if it were losing its form. I raised the gun and fired. The flash lit up the wall. I heard a high-pitched howl, and the thing ran. But the dogs didn't wait for my command. They shot out the side of the house, cutting through the snow like knives. Barking, branches snapping, then silence. I ran to the door, heart pounding like a drum. I shouted their names, one by one. Nothing. Minutes later, Rex returned, bleeding from one paw, but steady. Murphy came next, panting, eyes wide, chest heaving like a bellows. Benny was last. He had something stuck in his teeth, a piece of fabric. I took it carefully. It was a fragment of jeans soaked in blood, with a faded tag sewn into the hem. On it, 3 letters stitched by hand. JM. My head spun. Not from fear, but from something deeper. The feeling that the creature had once been someone. Eureka isn't the kind of place where people talk about curses. But stories? Oh, we've got plenty. People who vanished without explanation. Entire families who abandoned their properties overnight. There's always someone who blames the winter, the booze, or the isolation. But I remembered a story. Jack Marin, a guy who disappeared in 1994. He was in his early 20s. Lived with his mother in a cabin near the Cedar Pass Trail. Was known for venturing into the woods alone, even on full moon nights. They said he talked to trees, that he never slept, that he read books in strange languages, and one night, he vanished. Police scoured the area for weeks. They found blood, bits of clothing, no body. His mother died 3 months later. They say of heartbreak, or maybe fear. The fragment in my hand was old, but not that old. The embroidered tag told me the name of that creature hadn't been lost. It was Jack Marin. The next morning, I went straight to town, even though my eyes were heavy from what could barely be called sleep. The dogs were exhausted but unharmed, and that made me even more uneasy. Whatever had confronted them, whatever was stalking us, wasn't just a hungry beast. It was something with awareness, something that knew when to strike and when to retreat, something that could think. I parked the old pickup in front of the town's gas station and convenience store. Inside, as always, was Geraldine Lowe, her hair tied up in a crooked bun, smoking a menthol cigarette near the counter. The same as when I arrived in Eureka over 20 years ago. The only one who still read real newspapers and kept folders with records of things the town preferred to forget. She looked up as soon as I walked in, and before I could say a word, she said, "You saw something, didn't you?" That froze me inside. "How do you know?" I asked, forcing my voice out. Geraldine stubbed out the cigarette in the metal ashtray and leaned forward. "Because you've got the same look your father had when he came back from the South Trail in 1983. Eyes hollow, like he'd looked into a bottomless pit." I sat in the plastic chair in front of the counter and pulled the scrap of cloth from my pocket, still damp. "This belonged to someone, embroidered with JM, I said, pushing the fabric toward her. Geraldine picked up the cloth with invisible gloves, as if she knew it carried more than blood. She examined it in silence for a few seconds, and then whispered, "Jack Marin." The name hit me like a punch in the gut. I only nodded in confirmation. "Do you remember the story?" I asked. "I remember like it was yesterday. He disappeared near the Cedar Pass Trail. All they found was a torn coat and a pool of blood. His mother said he had gone back to the other side." Geraldine paused, but no one wanted to listen, called it grief-induced madness. "The other side? The side of the woods, the side of the things that walk when the moon rises and men sleep," she replied, staring out the window. "Some folks swore they saw red eyes in the nights that followed. Chickens went missing. Dogs turned up dead. Then it stopped, as if it had left or gone dormant. And now it's awake again," I said. Geraldine nodded with a sigh. She stood slowly, walked to a shelf at the back of the store, and pulled down a cardboard box labeled Old Winters. From it, she took a plastic-covered notebook. Inside were newspaper clippings, faded photographs, handwritten reports. One, dated 1995, read, "Cries in the forest. Witnesses report beast-like sounds coming from the north side of Kootenai. A hunter found footprints that looked human, but with claws. No one wanted to publish it. The story never made it past the editor," she said, showing me a note written by a retired sheriff in the corner of the page. His mother warned them. The town chose to forget. "And why the name? Jack Marin." I hesitated. "Is it true that saying the name brings the thing back?" Geraldine looked at me like I had just spat on a church altar. "Names are chains or keys, Sam. When you speak the name of a dead one who hasn't rested, you knock on the door, and some things hear it." I closed my eyes, cursing myself. I hadn't just thought the name. I'd said it, repeated it, whispered it. "Is there a way to shut the door again?" "If there is," she whispered. "No one lived long enough to teach it." She handed me a bag with a jar of coarse salt, a bundle of dried rue, and 3 black candles. "It won't save you, but it might tell you when to run." I paid without arguing, left the store with a taste of rust in my mouth. Deep in my heart I knew running was no longer an option. I had been marked, and now all that remained was to wait for the next moon. That night the sky looked like a sheet of metal. No stars visible, no wind. Just a cold that seemed to rise from the ground, from the stones, from within the earth itself. The kind of cold you don't feel on your skin but in your bones. I placed salt on the windows and doorsteps, tied the dried rue in 3 spots around the house. At the living room entrance, the bedroom door, and the latch on the shed. The black candles I left on the makeshift altar above the fireplace, between an old image of Saint Michael and a photograph of my mother. The dogs were restless. Benny circled the house as if searching for a familiar scent. Murphy stood still in front of the door, ears perked. And Rex. Rex already knew. His eyes carried the memory of the previous night, as if he'd seen it before, and now waited for the worst. At 11:30, everything went too quiet. No crickets, no owls, just the sound of my own heart pounding like a hammer in my chest. At 11:45, the shed door creaked open on its own. Just slightly. As if someone, from the outside, had leaned against it with their body, or their snout. I grabbed the shotgun, cocked it, and sat in the living room chair with the dogs around me. The candle's flame trembled as if it knew. At exactly midnight, the howl came. It wasn't just a sound, it was a warning. It began far off, in the woods, deep, drawn out. A single note, rising slowly and dragging through the air like smoke. The dogs froze. Murphy stepped back. Benny let out a short whimper. But Rex stood tall and barked. It was the first bark since it all started. A deep, sharp bark. A challenge. The howl stopped. And then came the footsteps. This time it wasn't like the previous nights. The thing wasn't circling the house. It was coming straight. The sound of snow being stepped on, branches snapping, claws scraping against the frozen ground. I ran to the kitchen and turned off the light, pointed the shotgun at the back door. Rex positioned himself at my side, Benny between my legs. Murphy growled at the window. Silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence. Not one of peace, but of a predator, as if the world had held its breath. And then the wooden wall creaked loudly. An impact, then another, as if someone were testing the house's structure. A long scratching came from outside, followed by a dull thump. Then the pantry window latch began to move. Slowly, insistently. I didn't wait. I fired at the window. The glass exploded, and I heard a roar. Yes, a roar, of pain or anger, I couldn't tell. Something dragged itself back into the dark. The dogs erupted in barking. Murphy launched through the back door, which I barely managed to shut in time. Benny ran to the living room. Rex leapt through the shattered window without hesitation. I shouted, but it was too late. The night turned to chaos. Lights on, paws pounding, the sound of the thing fleeing or retreating to attack from another side. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. The beam trembled with my hand. I walked through the snow, following the barking. Behind the shed, I found Murphy standing still, staring into the woods. His breathing was heavy, his snout stained with blood. Blood that wasn't his. Rex appeared next, carrying a chunk of flesh in his jaws. It was dark, fibrous, like burned leather. He dropped it on the ground and looked at me as if to say, "We're facing something that bleeds, but doesn't die easily." I returned home with all three. Spent the rest of the night awake, cleaning the dogs' wounds with warm water and alcohol. They all had injuries, but they were alive. They were fighting for me. It was in that dawn, sitting on the living room floor, hands trembling and the dogs lying around me, that I understood what it meant to be protected. That thing wanted to get in. And it would have, if it weren't for them. The next morning, the snow woke up dirty. Not from dirt or leaves, but from blood. Scattered stains, some dark, others fresh. There was a trail leading from the side of the house to the back of the shed. The footprints were there again. Deep, wide, like distorted human feet with long claws scratching the snow. I followed slowly, shotgun in hand, the dogs walking silently beside me. Benny limping a little, Rex as alert as ever, Murphy staring intently at something I couldn't yet see. The shed door was ajar, even though it had been locked the night before. When I pushed it open, the smell hit me like a punch to the face. Iron, viscera, urine. A combination that wasn't natural. Inside, the scene was carnage. My tools were scattered across the floor, some broken, others covered in blood. The supply boxes were destroyed. And in the corner, the chickens, or what was left of them. Feathers stuck to the walls, bodies ripped apart, heads torn off. This wasn't hunting. This was brutality. But the worst part was on the back wall. Claw marks, deep ones, 10, maybe 15, as if something with iron nails had tried to carve its way through the solid wood. And above them, strange symbols drawn in blood, like sigils but done in a hurry. A circle split in half, and inside it, 3 parallel slashes. Rex moved toward the corner and began sniffing the floor. He brushed his snout against a dark stain that trailed outside the shed. A drag mark. Something, or someone, had been pulled inside, or out. Murphy gave a sharp bark. The shed's roof creaked. I looked up, but saw nothing. Still, the sound kept me on edge. I went back inside, grabbed the long-range flashlight, and followed the trail into the woods. The blood trail faded between the pines, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step. I didn't go far, just enough to find something stuck at the base of a tree. A hunting knife, old, rusty, with a bone handle, and carved into the handle, once again, JM. I rushed back. Each step echoed louder than the last. It wasn't fear. It was urgency. Geraldine had said that name summon, and I was surrounded by trails, marks, objects. It was as if that being was revealing itself, taunting me, preparing me. I spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing the house. Steel plates on the doors, crossed planks on the windows. I rigged an improvised trap with wire and bells along the edge of the roof. Nothing sophisticated, just enough to know when something got too close. I prepped the dogs with fresh water and food, gave them natural antibiotics mixed with chicken, which they accepted without resistance. They were warriors, each in their own way. Benny, small and agile. Murphy, brute and direct. And Rex, the silent alpha. The sun began to dip behind the trees, painting the sky a dirty orange. The night that was coming wasn't like the others. I felt it in my bones. The moon would rise full that dawn, and for the first time since it all began, I was ready to kill. When the moon rose behind the mountains that night, it looked bigger than I remembered. A perfect circle, orange, hanging in the sky like a watchful eye. The light it shed wasn't cold like it usually was. It was warm, almost feverish, and it painted the snow red. Rex was the first to get up. He had been lying by the fireplace, but suddenly raised his head, as if a silent call had awakened him. Benny and Murphy followed seconds later, snouts turned toward the window. The 3 dogs were motionless, their bodies tense, eyes fixed on the woods. I went to the door with my shotgun loaded and a flashlight slung over my shoulder. Took a deep breath and stepped onto the porch. The forest was alive. Branches swayed without wind. The trees seemed to lean forward as if listening. A distant sound echoed, low and steady, like breathing. Ice cracked beneath my boots as if I were stepping on bones. I walked to the point where the fence ended, near a twisted old pine, and there I found something caught in the low branches. A silver locket. It was dirty, covered in dried blood and mud. The chain broken, the pendant hanging by a twisted thread. I picked it up with a cloth and cleaned it just enough to see what was inside. When I opened the locket, I nearly dropped it. Inside, an old faded photo. A young male face, hollow eyes, and a forced smile. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, a name, Jack Marin. But what truly chilled me was the handwritten phrase, shaky and barely legible. "Forgive me, Mother. The moon called me." It wasn't just a warning, it was a confession. The thing that was hunting me wasn't a beast blinded by hunger. It was a man trapped inside something older, greater. Jack hadn't disappeared. He had surrendered. Whether by choice or desperation, I didn't know. But there was the proof. He had crossed a line. And now, he existed between forms, neither man nor beast. I returned home with the locket in my pocket, heart pounding like a drum. Rex followed me the whole way, eyes fixed on the woods. There was no doubt the creature was near. I spent the following hours preparing, sharpening machetes, heating an iron rod in the old oven. I placed the locket in a wooden box, wrapped in coarse salt, and left it under the image of St. Michael. Geraldine's words echoed in my mind. He who names, calls. He who stays silent, seals the prison. But I had already spoken, repeated. And now, with the full moon above my home, there was no way to shut the door. Around 3 in the morning, the bells started ringing. Not like before. Now it was constant, as if something were walking across the roof. The dogs barked with fury. Benny stayed in the living room, pointing upward. Murphy ran to the kitchen. Rex growled in a way I'd never heard before. Then the roof beams cracked loudly, like an anvil had been dropped on top. I ran to the center of the house, looking up. The creature was on top of the house, and now it knew I was ready too. The roof creaked again, louder, closer. The wood bent under the weight of the thing walking on it. I could hear it sniffing. The sound was wet, visceral, as if it were inhaling my presence, as if it were tasting the fear in the air. I killed all the house lights with a single switch on the breaker, lit a single candle on the table, and the shadows on the walls became pale and shaky. The dogs positioned themselves around me. Rex to the left, Murphy to the right. Benny under the table, eyes wide, teeth bared. I wasn't trembling anymore. There was no room left for doubt or fear. Only action remained. Then the sound came like thunder. The roof caved in. Part of the ceiling collapsed into the living room. Wood, dust, and snow flew. The candle blew out, but even in the dark I saw them. The red eyes, alive, ravenous, drenched in pain and fury. The creature landed in the center of the room with an impact that shook the floor. It was massive, bigger than anything I had ever seen. Covered in fur, but with patches of bare, torn skin, as if it were in a state of eternal transition. Its head was a hybrid of wolf and man, teeth far too long for its jaw, eyes too deep set to belong to just an animal. I fired. The shot hit the creature's shoulder, making it stagger, howling so loudly that it felt like the glass in the house would shatter. Murphy was the first to attack, launching himself at the beast's flank and sinking his teeth into its hairy thigh. Rex followed, straight for the neck. Benny bit where he could, small but fierce, barking as if it were the last sound he'd ever make. The fight was chaos, bodies crashing, furniture breaking. The creature roared, trying to shake off the dogs, slashing with its sharp claws. The living room became a battlefield. I dropped the shotgun, grabbed the iron rod I had heated in the fireplace, and charged. I drove the rod into the creature's chest with all the strength I had left. The flesh burned. The smell of fur and blood boiling filled the room. The monster screamed, a scream that was more human than animal. The dogs attacked with even more fury. Murphy tore the creature's ear. Rex bit its arm to the bone. Benny, the small warrior, leapt and sank his teeth into the beast's deformed face. The creature fell to its knees, trying to escape, but there was no way out. It tried to roll, to crawl toward the door. But it was surrounded, bleeding from every direction. Every movement left a thick trail on the floor, and then it stopped. It started to change. The fur began to fall off in clumps. The bones shrank. The red eyes lost their glow. The teeth pulled back. And in place of the beast, a naked, skinny man covered in wounds, breathed with difficulty. The dogs backed off, panting, blood-covered. Benny whimpered. Murphy was limping. Rex looked at me, waiting for the next command. I approached, still holding the iron rod. The man looked at me. Tired eyes. He recognized the pain. And then he whispered, I tried to stop. It was Jack Marin, the same face from the Lockett photo. Older, deformed, but still him. And then he died. His eyes went dark. His chest stopped rising. The room fell silent. Only the distant barks of other forest dogs echoed. I dropped to my knees. The dogs came to me. We held each other, me and them, in that room covered in blood and broken wood, under the full moon now shining red through the hole in the ceiling. The nightmare was over. Or maybe it had just begun. The moon was already low when I finally moved. I dragged Jack Marin's body to the shed with the help of Rex and Murphy, who, even injured, wouldn't leave my side. Benny stayed on the porch, watching everything with big, tearful eyes. I wrapped the naked body in an old sheet, stitched it shut with thick thread, and buried it in the woods, far from the house, beneath a withered oak tree. I marked the spot with stacked stones, and covered it with coarse salt, rue, and scraps of rusty iron. Not out of superstition, out of fear. For 3 days the forest remained silent. No sounds, no animals, no howling. It was as if nature itself breathed a sigh of relief. The dogs recovered slowly. Murphy had a nasty wound on his hind leg, but he held firm. Benny went back to barking like before, even if limping. And Rex grew more silent than ever. He spent hours watching the forest's edge, as if expecting something, as if he knew it wasn't over. Because deep down, I knew too. The peace was thin, like a film ready to tear. I returned to town a week later. Geraldine greeted me without a word. I placed the locket on her counter. "It's true," I said. "It was him." She picked up the object with care, as if handling dynamite. "You buried him?" "In a forgotten place. No one will find it." She nodded, but her eyes drifted away, as if calculating a future tragedy. "You know, Sam, sometimes the curse doesn't die with the cursed. It waits, jumps from one to another, like a worm waiting for a new body." "Is it too late to warn anyone?" No one would listen. She gave a sad smile. "But you've done your part. Now it's watch duty, like the old ones. Like those who came before." I returned home with the feeling of carrying an invisible anchor. In the days that followed, I cleaned up the wreckage, rebuilt the roof, threw out the blood-stained wood. But the stain on the living room floor, that one wouldn't come out. A dark, jagged mark, like a scar left from the night the beast fell through the roof. I left it there, as a reminder, as a warning. On the second full moon after the attack, everything was calm. No sounds, no movement. But on the third, a howl, distant, faint, almost like a whisper. And my dogs rose at the same time. They didn't bark. They just looked at me. And I understood. The forest still held secrets. And now, I was their guardian.